Hello, friends. We are at our final two chapters of our Read Aloud, The Year of Billy Miller by Kevin Henkes. Chapter 4. Billy was supposed to practice reading his poem aloud at home, but he didn't like practicing in front of Mama, Papa, or Sal. Mama thought he should practice in front of someone, so Papa pulled out his cello with the mannequin arms from his studio and moved it into Billy's room. "You can practice in front of this," said Papa. "I knew it would come in handy some day." "It's better than nothing," said Mama, laughing. "I think it's helpful to have an audience of some sort." Billy took his baseball cap from their road trip their previous summer and put it on top of the cello. Mama made a sign that said, "I love poetry," and stuck it in one of the mannequin's hands. Mama named the cello Poetry Mannequin, and that was what everyone called it. Reading to Poetry Man was easier than reading to a real person. Billy practiced every day. Billy practiced every day at school, too. The second graders took turns reading their poems at the front of the room. There were 3 comments, Miss Silver repeated: read slowly, read loudly, and read with expression. The students didn't have to memorize their poems, but they could if they wanted to. So far, just a few had chosen to do so. Emma was one of them, but Billy was not. "I have extra copies of each of your poems," said Miss Silver. "I'll have a nice new copy for you the night of the show, so don't worry if you leave your copy at home." She thought for a moment. "Oh, and even if you memorize your poem, I'd like you to take a copy with you up to the stage. That way, if you forget your words, you'll have them with you. This is a no-worries show." Emma raised her hand. When she was called on, she said, "I've memorized my poem so well I won't need a copy. I'm not boasting," she added. "It's just the truth." "I'd like everyone to have a copy," said Miss Silver evenly, "just in case." "When do we get to use the microphone?" asked Ned. "Everyone will have a chance to try the microphone," said Miss Silver. "We'll have at least one rehearsal with it before the day of the show." Billy couldn't wait to try the microphone. When teachers used the microphone for announcements during lunch period, their voices were so big and booming they filled the cafeteria. Billy had never used a microphone. He wondered what it would be like to have a voice that big. Room 2 was working hard on the show in other ways. The students painted a backdrop for the stage on large pieces of cardboard. They wrote the words, "We are family," because that was the name of the show, in huge block letters and patterned backgrounds with squiggled dots and stars in different colors. Miss Silver had to use her gong more than usual. "I think you've got summeritis," she said. "We've got show-titus," Ned yelled. Then Miss Silver said, "I think room 2 has turned into a lively, noisy beehive." After that, besides the regular room 2 noises, there were lots of buzzing sounds too. The backdrop looked messy to Billy, like a wall of graffiti from an abandoned building, or something Sal would have done if she had been let loose with paints and a brush. But Miss Silver had a different opinion. When the backdrop was finished, she stood with her hands on her hips and studied it. She smiled and nodded. "It's beautiful," she said. Her smile was so wide, there were big dents in her cheeks. Miss Silver had invitations printed for the big night. She left space on the fronts of the invitations so that students could decorate them. "Make them personal," she said. "Make them your own." Billy drew a picture of Poetry Man on his invitation, complete with 4 arms and his hat. He thought Mama and Papa would like it. Emma leaned toward Billy and stared intently at his drawing. She made a sour face and said, "Why did you draw an instrument? For your information, we're not having a musical concert." Billy moved his drawing closer to his chest and tightened his grip on his marker after months of sitting by her. Billy had learned that the best way to deal with Emma was to ignore her. But in his private thoughts, he said, "For your information, mind your own business." "I'm drawing my grandma on my invitation," said Emma. "She's coming all the way from Minneapolis for the show. I memorized my poem because it makes it more special if you memorize." Billy gripped his marker even tighter. He wondered if Emma was right. He wondered if memorizing your poem did make it more special. He hadn't seriously considered memorizing his poem until now. If he could do it, Mama might be especially happy and proud. If he could do it, it would be a way to prove how smart he was. Billy memorized his poem. He didn't tell anyone. It was a secret between him and Poetry Man. It would be a surprise for Mama. At the final rehearsal of the show on the stage with a microphone, Billy thought he should give it a try. He'd recite his poem from memory. But he was so startled and mesmerized by what the microphone did to the sound of his voice. When he said the title of his poem, he forgot every word of it. Luckily, he had a copy of it in his hand. After taking a deep breath, he read from his paper in a voice that seemed big enough to fill every inch of the school. He thought, at least this wasn't the show, he thought. I still have a chance to do it for real. He thought, now that I know what it's like to use a microphone, I can do it perfectly for Mama. Chapter 5. Before they left for the show, Billy sneaked into Sal's room to look for the pearl he'd given her months earlier. He knew she kept a shoebox of her favorite things under her bed. He figured that would be a good place to check first. He found it. The pearl was there in the shoebox among seashells, pebbles, and Sal's new favorite thing, her collection of little erasers in the shape of animals. He rubbed the pearl against his shirt, slipped it in front of his pant pocket. He needed all the luck he could get. He returned it after the show. Do you have your poem? Mama asked before they left the house. Billy held up his copy of the poem. He folded it into quarters. I hope you know how much I love it, she said. It's a great poem. Thanks, said Billy. Papa helped me write a poem, said Sal. Listen. Roses are red, violets are blue. Billy's a poet, and I am too. Sweet, said Mama. Aren't we original, said Papa. Miss Silver wouldn't allow any roses or red poems, said Billy. They're too easy, he added with authority. Is everyone ready? Asked Papa. He filled a backpack with plastic containers of his homemade cookies for the party after the show. He slung the backpack over his shoulder. Onward, he said. Sal was holding Raindrop by her tail. Now she usually took just one drop sister with her when she was away from home. Billy's family met Ned's family at the corner, and they walked together. Billy knew how important the show was because they were having it after dinner on a school night. It felt strange and exciting to be going to school at this time of day. Only 6 more days of school, Ned said gleefully. 6 more days, said Billy. 6 more days, Papa echoed, shaking his head. Where did the year go? Billy and Ned swung their arms dramatically, lifting their knees high, and jutted their chins. They marched and chanted through the still, heavy air. 6 more days! 6 more days! The air in the auditorium was heavy, but it was not still. It was electric. At least that's the way it felt to Billy. Parents, brothers, sisters, grandparents, aunts, uncles, neighbors, and friends were filling up the room. People were talking about fanning themselves. Little kids were chasing up and down the aisles and climbing on the seats. Eruptions of laughter came and went in waves. Miss Silver saved seats in the front rows for the Room 2 poets and their special guests. Each reserved seat had a student's or a guest name taped on it. The students and guests would be sitting in the order in which they would appear on stage. To signal the start of the show, Miss Silver sounded her gong. Everyone found their places. Billy sat between Mama and Emma's grandmother. Silence descended upon the auditorium like a spell. When the curtain opened, revealing the backdrop, Miss Silver swept her arm out toward it, and the audience applauded. Room 2 presents We Are Family, said Miss Silver, our celebration of poetry and those we love. Miss Silver stood at the corner of the stage. A small microphone was clipped to her dress. A big microphone was at the center of the stage, gleaming and waiting. Our first poet will be Grace Cotter, Miss Silver announced. Her special guest is her Uncle Zach. Next up will be Jamaica Taylor. Grace and her uncle mounted up the 3 stairs to the stage. As Grace passed in front of her, Miss Silver handed Grace a copy of her poem. Grace and her uncle walked slowly to the microphone. Jamaica and her father waited against the wall at the bottom of the stairs, ready to go. At first, Grace was too far away from the microphone, but her uncle nudged her closer. Then she ended up sideways, facing him rather than the audience, as she read her poem. When she finished, she was to exit backstage, go through the hallway, and return to her seat. She ran off the stage while the audience clapped. And so it went. Miss Silver would announce each poet, state who was up next, and hand a copy of the poem to the poet on the way to the microphone. Billy had a hard time paying attention to what was happening on stage. He kept saying the words to his poem in his head. He knew his poem so well, he figured he would still be able to say it by heart when he was 90. From time to time, Mama looked at Billy and smiled. Before long, Miss Silver said, Our next poet is Emma Sparks. Her grandmother Judy is her special guest. Following Emma will be Billy Miller. Billy and Mama rose and walked along the wall to the corner of the stage. Billy had left his copy of his poem on his seat. He folded and unfolded it so many times it was falling apart. He'd get a new copy from Miss Silver just in case. Billy watched Emma. She walked up the stairs with such confidence. She lifted her head and turned it away from Miss Silver when she glided past her on stage. She didn't take a copy of her poem, and when she recited her poem slowly, loudly, and with expression, she flapped her hands about like birds as if to say, "Look at me! Of course I memorized my poem. I don't need to have a copy of it in case I forget the words, because forgetting the words would be impossible for me." When she finished, she grinned, a know-it-all grin, and took a deep bow. After a few long moments of applause, Billy heard Miss Silver say his name. It was his turn. If Emma could do it, I can do it, he thought, as he ascended the stairs to the stage. Billy Silver smiled at Billy, or Miss Silver smiled at Billy and offered him a copy of his poem. He smiled back at her, shook his head, and whispered, "I don't need it." He rubbed Sal's pearl in his pocket one last time, and he made his way to the middle of the stage. He could sense Mama right behind him. Billy inched up to the microphone. He looked at the audience. When he practiced with the microphone, only 2 kids were watching. Now there seemed to be an ocean of people watching, stretching from wall to wall, fanning back towards the doors. A shivery feeling shot through him. It was a good feeling at first. He tried to locate Papa and Sal among the sea of heads, but he couldn't. And then the good feeling turned bad. He had an odd sensation that the world around him was moving in all directions. His mouth was dry. His heart was pounding. Once again he forgot every word of his poem, including the title, but this time he didn't have a copy of it to read from. He saw Miss Silver in the fringes of his vision. She was smiling, nodding, and urging him on with her wide eyes. Should he walk over to her to get a copy of his poem? She seemed about a mile away, and he didn't think he could make his legs move. What should he do? The air felt weird all of a sudden, as if it had sprouted wings and was brushing against him. The air was fluttering against his arm. How could that be? He turned around, and Mama was there, with a copy of his poem, tapping it lightly against his elbow. "Here," she whispered, "you can do it." And he could. And he did. He read his poem into the microphone from beginning to end in a voice that was made so big and loud and wide it seemed to bounce beyond the walls of school, reaching to the world outside, to the moon. Everyone clapped. He heard Papa whistle, although he still couldn't spot him. The next thing he knew, he was in the hallway behind the stage, enveloped in Mama's arms. On the stage, it was as if he'd been separated from his body, and now he caught up with himself. Everything was back to normal. "You did it," said Mama. "You did it beautifully." "But I didn't do it by heart," said Billy. "It doesn't matter." "How did you have a copy of my poem?" asked Billy. "I took it from Miss Silver when I followed you on the stage," replied Mama. A moment passed, and then Billy asked, "Did you think that I couldn't do it?" Without missing a beat, Mama said, "I just want a souvenir from this wonderful night." Whatever the reason, Billy was grateful that Mama had done it and what she had done. They went back to their seats to watch the rest of the show. After the show, refreshments were served on long tables in the back of the auditorium. Billy had 4 of Papa's cookies. Ned tried to eat one of each different food item. Everyone's talking about the experience of being on stage. "Did you hear that incredibly screechy sound when I was up there?" asked Ned. "My dad said it's called feedback. I have major feedback," he bragged. "When I was up there," said Billy, "there were so many people I couldn't even see my dad." "All I know," said Emma, "is that I ended up being the only memorizer." Emma's comment nagged at Billy. He'd already recited his poem from memory in his head 2 times since the show had ended. He tried to convince himself that it didn't matter, and he told himself that he could recite it for Mama at home. People were milling about, eating, laughing, chatting. When Miss Silver's gong sounded, a hush came over the room. Miss Silver was at the center of the stage by the microphone. "Thank you, everyone," said Miss Silver. "We accomplished a lot this year, not just putting on this marvelous show." A few people clapped. Mama touched Billy's shoulder. Papa winked at him, and Sal made Raindrop dance. "We studied and learned so much," Miss Silver continued. "We worked hard." She smiled and raised one hand up near her heart. "Our school year overlapped with the Chinese year of the rabbit and the year of the dragon." But I like to think of this as the year of room 2. Everyone clapped and cheered for a long time. Miss Silver stepped away from the microphone and waved enthusiastically as she walked to the corner of the stage and down the stairs. It took it looked to Billy as if Miss Silver might cry. Some of the parents rushed to Miss Silver to hug her. She slowly made her way to the back of the room by the food. People began eating and laughing and chatting again. No one seemed to notice as Billy moved quietly toward the stage, weaving through clusters of people. He took the stairs lightly and stepped up to the microphone. Billy looked out onto the auditorium. No one was staring at him. No one was paying attention. He almost felt alone. He touched the silver netted top of the microphone, and he could tell that the power was off. He swallowed. Before he could change his mind, he began to recite his poem from memory. He felt the first words catch in his mouth, and then they rolled out of him as easily as could be. He did it quickly, but he did it. When he was finished, he could hear the rush of blood in his ears. He felt light, as if he weighed next to nothing. He scanned the crowd for Mama, and he saw her instantly. She was right at the foot of the stage. Their eyes connected, and he knew that she had been watching him. She heard him, and even without the microphone on, she was smiling and nodding. Explosions like little volcanoes were going off inside him. He felt wonderful, maybe never felt better. And then, because he felt so good and because he couldn't stop himself, he leaned into the second microphone and exclaimed in a voice meant just for Mama, "This is the year of Billy Miller." And that's the end of our story. Thanks for listening, everybody.